Well, when you look at the facts, they tell a very powerful story about the unprecedented economic support that the Morrison government has provided to Queensland. We have delivered, Pete, $27.9 billion of economic support to Queenslanders. This compares to Anastasia Palaszczuk committing $8.8 billion. So we have delivered more than 3 times what the Queensland government has committed to in terms of economic support for Queenslanders. We've seen 1.5 million Queenslanders receive the $750 payments from the federal government. 650,000 Queenslanders have been receiving the JobKeeper payment. More than 650,000 Queenslanders receiving the coronavirus supplement, and 100,000 plus businesses in Queensland receiving the cash flow boost. This is money that the Morrison government has provided to Queenslanders. So we'd welcome further announcements by the Palaszczuk government, indeed from all state governments, to reach into their pockets and provide the support that is necessary as part of Australia's economic recovery. But certainly the Morrison government has been doing the bulk of the heavy lifting and will continue to support Queenslanders with substantial economic measures.
OK, well, on that, so JobKeeper, that ends at the end of March. As you know, the tourism sector, particularly in far north Queensland, has been absolutely decimated. So what are you going to do about that beyond March? What extra help can be provided?
Well, JobKeeper has only been one, albeit the single largest one, of many economic measures that the government has rolled out and will continue to roll out. So, for example, in last year's budget, I announced $350 million of support for regional tourism across Australia. We announced a package for travel agents worth more than $100 million. We have the tax cuts, which are providing more than $1 billion a month into the pockets of Australian families, money that can be spent helping to create jobs. We've also put in place the JobMaker hiring credit to get young people who are out of work into work. We've brought forward billions of dollars of infrastructure investments. We've provided a 50% wage subsidy to help businesses take on new apprentices, more than 300,000 new training places, and of course, very substantial investment incentives for businesses to do a refit or to buy some new machinery, all of which will create economic activity in Queensland across all industries. And we know that the border restrictions have been made it pretty tough for the tourism sector. That's why we welcome recent news from Queensland that they'll be loosening those border restrictions and opening up to the rest of the country.
OK, but will more come specifically for the tourism sector beyond March? Are you planning on it?
We'll continue to monitor the situation. We do recognise that the tourism sector has been hit particularly hard. But we also point out how much substantial support we have already provided, not just to the tourism sector, but to the economy more broadly. And you'll remember, Pete, that the government released figures very recently that showed there's an additional $200 billion on family balance sheets and business balance sheets that was not there this time last year. That's money that's been saved. That's money that is being delivered by the federal government. That money will help be spent across the economy, helping to create jobs. And when it comes to tourism, more than 70 cents in the dollar and the tourism dollar is spent domestically as a result of domestic tourism. And that's why opening the borders and reducing those restrictions are so important.
OK, further signs this morning that the economy is getting back to where it was. Treasurer deferred home loans have dropped from its peak last year, 500,000 down to 100,000. So that's a significant drop. There's still a lot of people, though, who are going to need extra help.
Well, Pete, you're absolutely right. The economic recovery still has some way to go, and we know that the road ahead is going to be hard, it's going to be challenging. There's a certain degree of unpredictability about how the world tackles this vaccine. But we do know that Australia has seen the jobs come back, and 90% of the 1.3 million Australians who lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero are now back at work. We've seen economic growth pick up. We've seen capital, city and regional house prices pick up. We've seen retail trade pick up. And now we have another data point showing that people are starting to repay those loans, repayments that were deferred at the height of the crisis. I mean, to consider that at the height of this crisis, the banks deferred payments on $250 billion worth of loans. Around 3/4 of those were household loans, home loans, and 1/4 of those were small business loans. We've now seen 80% of those loans to households start to be repaid back, and 90% of those loans that were deferred, or the repayments that were deferred to small business, start to be repaid back. This is good news for the economy, and it shows the confidence and the ability Australians now have to start making those repayments again.
Just a couple of quick final ones, Treasurer. Overnight, Germany has advised people over the age of 65 not to take the AstraZeneca vaccine. Are you concerned about that? Could that well be applied here?
Well, the first thing to say, Pete, is the Pfizer vaccine is the one that's received the TGA approval here in Australia, and we will now roll that out to Australians in accordance with the procedures that we have put in place. And those vaccines are being delivered without age restrictions. Now, the AstraZeneca vaccine has not yet received TGA approval. We're expecting a recommendation from the TGA by early March, if not sooner. They will take into account the German regulatory authorities' thinking and data, as well as the British regulatory authorities' thinking and data, because the Germans have said they don't have enough data to provide it to those over 65s, whereas the UK regulatory authorities have reached a different decision. So the TGA here, it's an independent process, it's very well regarded, we will fully follow its recommendations with respect to the AstraZeneca vaccine, but as I said, we have yet to receive that recommendation, but we are expecting to receive it before March, but by early March or before.
Okay, just finally on Anthony Albanese's cabinet reshuffle, or his front bench reshuffle yesterday. It's all about jobs, jobs, jobs for this year leading up to a potential election. He's got two men basically on your tail now with Richard Marles, as well as the Shadow Treasurer as well, Jim Chalmers. You got any concerns about that?
Well, Labor's reshuffle is not about Australians' jobs. It's about helping to save Anthony Albanese's job. It's all about shifting the chairs there because it's very clear, whether it's Tanya Plibersek or Jim Chalmers, who unfortunately got a demotion yesterday, he and Tanya have made it very clear to everyone who's willing to listen that they're interested in that top job. So while the nation is fighting the pandemic, Labor is fighting amongst themselves, and things must be desperate for Anthony Albanese if he's had to sack his closest political ally in Mark Butler to try to keep the wolves from the door. So it's pretty desperate times on the other side of the political fence right now.
Okay.